One of the most basic natural acts committed by all females since the dawn of time is childbirth. More than 385,000 babies are born every day. It's not a miracle though. It happens all because of the people in our community, like nurses, doctors, and midwives. My name is Sarah, and in this podcast, my colleagues and I are going to discuss the midwifery movement, where it started and where it is today. Our podcast features an interview done by our colleague Michael with a midwife student named Eva that views her role as part of a greater movement of reproductive justice. You will also get to hear from our colleagues Uli and Citlalli as they discuss their research on midwifery and the reactions to Eva's interview. But first, a brief background on the midwifery movement. According to neonatology.com, midwife is an English word that translates to with women, which of course implies the supportive, attentive aspect of midwives and doulas. The earliest known midwives could be traced back to biblical times. These midwives were wise women who had attended several births and gained enough knowledge to attend other births and support the mother as well as assist in the delivery. In these times, men or the fathers of the child were not allowed to be present during the birth because it was considered indecent. So that was when the practice of only having women became the normal, and all women in the community would attend to show support and encouragement for the mother. By the late 1910 to 1920s, medical staff like nurses and doctors were being seen as more relevant to assist during childbirth, and midwifery slowly faded away. This was due to the fact that the Shepherd-Towner Act stated that pregnancy and childbirth were now labeled as a risky or a dangerous condition that required the attendance of a skilled licensed doctor and nurses. Today, 98.4% of women give birth in hospitals. However, according to midwife.com, more than 70% of all births are accompanied by a nurse, midwife, or doula. Today, the job of the doula is to now be there to make the labor go as smooth as possible, as well as spiritually guide the mother and the baby, insisting that the labor be all natural without drugs unless medically necessary, as well as ensuring that once the baby is out, the nurses and doctors follow the holistic natural birthing plan the mother intended to have. Midwives and doulas ensure that this memorable moment goes exactly the way the mother wants it to be.
So hello, I'm here with Eva Areola, and she is a practicing midwife or a bruja in training, and this is a interview just arcing her experience and her life experience.
Good morning, Michael. My name is Eva Maria Areola. I am currently a student midwife. I was born and raised in Salinas, California, and I was lucky enough that I found a brown midwife in the area, and she's my preceptor. Her name is Nancine Maldonado. And so I have been practicing with her for almost about 2 years now. So I've been attending home births in the area. I'm currently a birth assistant, so a midwife assistant, and also a birth and postpartum doula. So I do postpartum rituals that originate from Mesoamerica and, Mexico. And I also make plant medicine.
So I don't know much about it, but the practices that you're bringing in, and you say that you're using like a lot of indigenous methods within your midwifery, and indigenous being like a monolithic term and the way like we think about it. Are you drawing practices that have quote unquote been passed down to you by your mother or from that are specific to Jalisco?
So unfortunately, yes, like Jalisco is rich in its cultura, but a lot of it is Spanish culture. There's a lot of like baile folclórico, mariachi. Granted, of course, the food still will retain its roots, right? Because siempre pues hay tortillas, maíz que viene de Mexico, it's our staple food, the food of the gods, and, chocolate, cacao. So wherever you go in Mexico, the food will always like have its roots because it's the native plants of the area. But in Jalisco, I will say that my mom, like she instilled the love of plantas for me. But I wouldn't necessarily say that where my family is from, we're still tied to indigenous practices. It's more of a combination of, whatever European influence was there, along with anything that like has survived. But it's kind of just been all meshed together under the umbrella of like Mexican traditions, if that makes sense. When it comes back to claiming indigenous or native practices, like one of the things that we really have to acknowledge is that the majority of certified nurse midwives and certified midwives in the US, 85.52% identify as white. And then the next one would be, I think it's about 6.85% they identify as Black or African American. So the percentage of Latina or brown midwives in the US is not very high. And on top of that, that doesn't necessarily mean that these midwives are speaking any indigenous or native languages, let alone Spanish. And so when it comes to the line of work that I'm doing with midwifery, it's reproductive justice. Being a midwife, like activism is part of like your life. It's political, it's everything, there's just no escaping it. And so for myself, it is definitely bringing back the customs and rituals that have surrounded pregnancy and childbirth since pre-Hispanic times. And so that involves like encouraging people to eat their ancestral foods, depending like what part of the world you're from. Of course, like I'm very familiar with like the types of foods that we would eat in Mexico, but I also go like above and beyond. And then I love asking, what did your grandma eat when she was pregnant? Like, do you know if she had any postpartum care? Like, who was at her birth? And I love asking the question, who is the last person in your family to be born at home? Like, I love that question so much because it brings up the most beautiful conversations. Like for myself, like my mom and all her siblings were born at home and they're, in Mexico. And so I had been thinking about that and I was like, that's so crazy that like my cousins and I, when we came here, and some of my cousins in Mexico too, like by that point, big influence had been made so that women would birth in hospitals. People think that like home birth is this thing that people did like hundreds of years ago. But in reality, like our moms and our grandmas were probably born at home. So that's a big part of like what I want to do with midwifery here is like connecting people to like their customs and their practices and understanding why we did these things, understanding that our ancestors, like they were scientists. It's acknowledging like that emotional intelligence, right? Like that it's of high value. It's understanding that women, when they become pregnant and they carry this child and they birth this child, like it affects them like on an emotional and psychological level, and like that we need to nurture and care for this woman, that not only when she births a baby, she's also birthing herself.
While listening to Eva speak on the impact that midwifery has on different cultures around the world, it is important to remember how discrimination and racism impacts pregnant women every day. Here's Uli and Citlalli.
I am your co-host, Ulises Duenaz. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'll let my co-host introduce herself.
Hi guys, my name is Citlalli Galvan, and I use the pronouns she, her, hers.
And speaking into that, mortality rate has slowly increased, which I thought was really interesting. According to statistics found through the CDC, the maternal mortality rate for 2020 was 23.8 deaths per 100,000 live births, compared to the rate in 2019, which was only 20.1, which I think is really interesting. And when going on it, I feel like it's very important to acknowledge the racism and discrimination that's happening within the medical field, predominantly for Indigenous women, Latinx women, and Black women. Black women are undervalued and they are not monitored as carefully as white women are. And when they are presenting symptoms, they are often dismissed, which I feel like I've heard so often when it goes into like women within like my communities. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. Because I focused my paper on why the birth rates in the U.S. are actually decreasing is because many women are choosing not to have children. Actually, yeah. And I was more focused on an article written by CNN, literally labeled "Why Women Are Deciding Not to Have Kids," and a lot of it was some women just chose not to because they felt that they can't get the support they need. And how you said a lot of Indigenous women, Black women, Latinx women, they feel as if, you know, they're not accounted for. And that's so true because let's say in the scenario of like there's a single mother and she just had a child, she's not gonna get the same help as a white single mother would, which is honestly like so sad to hear that the government can say, oh yeah, we have all these programs for young single mothers or teen mothers, but it's in reality it's like, who are these programs really open to, you know?
Definitely. Yeah, and I feel like it goes into like how doulas and midwives are seen as like a non-traditional thing. And Eva brought this up during the podcast, like that like doulas and midwifery is seen as non-traditional, even though it's been embedded within Indigenous cultures and just like Latinx cultures and like people of color cultures in general, to create like a safe space for someone to go through as something so intense as giving birth to another individual. You know what I mean?
If you could tell us like a brief story about a memorable midwife experience that you've been on.
I want to talk about the very first home birth I went to. This was years ago. I was just becoming a doula, but this like older midwife in the area who's no longer practicing invited me with her. She invited me because the woman who wanted to have a home birth didn't speak English, so I was translating. It was really awesome. Like I came to all the prenatals with her and I just translated, and you know, we built this trust. And when she was giving birth, you know, I was providing a lot of the emotional support because she and I had bonded. And when the baby was born in the call. And what that means is that when the baby was born, the baby was still in its bag of waters. And I remember the baby like dropped onto the bed and he was still just, you know, in the bag of waters. Like he was in this in between, this realm of still being attached to his mother and in this like water like state, but you know, on earth still, like in this like just odd transition. And the midwife had to tear the bag of waters, and then the baby, you know, cried out. And I just remember thinking like just how magical and crazy like birth is. I'm never gonna forget that experience. It was really beautiful.
I think that's amazing. I never knew.
Each woman's experience during pregnancy is so unique, and a midwife's role in that can make a world of difference. Here again is Uli and Citlalli as they discuss the documentary No Mas Bebés that Uli watched as part of his research.
I know. And the other two folks that caught my attention was Dolores Madrigal. Her relationship with her husband became physically and emotionally abusive after they found out that of the sterilization procedure that happened weeks before, but they didn't really understand what was going on. And the other story that caught my attention was Melvina Hernandez. She was sterilized as well at 23, and she was not aware of the procedure until 4 years after. Forced to sign an English document for a C-section to quote-unquote save the lives of her and her baby, she refused because her husband was gone, though the nurse ended up grabbing her hand and signing it for her, which is, I'm just getting very emotional right now because it's really intense. And not having your partner there to like support, or not even having, imagine if there was the normalization of having a midwife or a doula there to help you navigate those conversations. Because a thread that was in between all of these stories were that these were immigrant mothers that didn't understand English, that didn't have somebody that spoke their native language while they're going through something that's so intense as giving birth. And then I don't know, that just reminds me of my mom too. Like, I was born in Mexico, Guadalajara, and everything was fine. I mean, I was there, but I don't know what happened, but I'm pretty sure everything was fine. Pero my little sister, she was born in Natividad Hospital in Salinas, and my mom told me that she was feeling so nervous and anxious because there was just a bunch of people around her speaking a language that she didn't know, telling her things to do, like giving her drugs, giving her this, giving her like a injection in the back to help her calm down and everything like that. But she didn't understand what was going on, and there wasn't that communication that could have happened if like there was a Latinx midwife there or a doula there, such as Eva, which is an icon, honestly. Like hearing her stories and how she delivered babies, or is in this journey of delivering babies, is so beautiful to me.
My mom shares a similar story to your mom, because me and my brother, we were both born here in California, in Santa Maria. It's just my brother's a year older. So when my brother was born, my dad was present with my mom, and since my mom spoke very little English, my dad was there. He was translating everything to her. He would speak with the doctors. Luckily, he was a loving husband, and he was like, hold on, let me like speak to my wife of what's going on. I want to make sure she's comfortable and that my baby's gonna be okay. My story, on the other hand, is that my dad was stuck at work in Yuma. My mom had to go to the hospital first by herself.
Oh my god.
And she tried to tell the doctors that, when in Spanish, estoy embarazada, translating to I'm pregnant. And it was so weird because in Santa Maria it was very Latinx based.
Yeah, definitely.
But most of the doctors there were prominent. Well, what she told me was they were mostly all white. She was just so scared.
Knowing all of this, when it comes to midwifery, when it comes to reproductive justice, like what worries you the most about it?
For midwifery, so midwifery there's different laws for midwifery in different states, right? And in certain states, you cannot be a practicing midwife, or there's all these like requirements and regulations. And for a moment in time, it was illegal to be a midwife. And so for midwifery, although there's like a revival definitely happening, for me, it's like worrisome sometimes just to think that laws, can change and we can be stripped of our human right to birth the way that we choose to. Everyone should have the right to choose and also to be well informed when making those decisions. My preceptor loves when I sing this song to the moms. It's called Todo tiene medicina dentro. So for anyone who speaks English, it just means like we all carry medicine within, and not medicine as in like prescription medicine, meaning like loosely translated to like we all carry like our own magic, our own healing abilities that we get to share with everyone. Todo cura, todo sana, todo tiene medicina dentro. Hey, nay, nay. Todo cura, todo sana, todo tiene medicina dentro. Llevo medicina dentro. Llevo el universo dentro. And it's a longer song, but I always just love to remind the people that I'm working with, it's like, you have the ability to soothe and heal and sustain yourself through everything, because you are part of the universe and you are the universe. And, when they're doubting their own ability, like I get to share my medicine with them so that they can like continue going.